A reading from Luke's 4th chapter, this one about Jesus in the wilderness with the devil and the temptations. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing at all during those days, and when they were over, he was famished. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread." Jesus answered him, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone." Then the devil led him up and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said to him, "To you I will give their glory and all this authority, for it has been given over to me, and I give it to anyone I please. If you then will worship me, it will be yours." Jesus answered him, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil took him to Jerusalem and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you. And on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test." When the devil had finished every test, he departed from him until an opportune time. So ends the reading of God's holy word. I invite us to pray. Holy and gracious God, we hear the story of Jesus and the temptations in the wilderness. And perhaps our first knee-jerk reaction is to say, how weird. Strange temptations. Not like anything I encountered. And we acknowledge that there is a difference. But we also know that there are temptations. There are ways in which we find ourselves pulled in directions that are not life-giving. And so we would ask for your grace in, first of all, identifying those. And secondly, again, only through your power, being able to resist them and to move in the direction of greater love and life. This is our prayer in your holy name. Amen. My television viewing tends to be usually around 50 years old. A lot of the shows that I watch, and recently I've taken to watching episodes of Wanted Dead or Alive. Raise your hand if you even know what that is. I do too, actually. It's a series in which a hero, a young Steve McQueen, always enters into some wilderness, somewhere in the desert Southwest, in search of somebody of questionable repute, only to emerge in about half an hour with cash in hand, his integrity largely intact, and his shirt seemingly dry cleaned as he rides off into the sunset. And the settings for these adventures are austere, often with saguaro cactus and desolate landscape, outlaws almost around every bend, and not a hint of color, since this was in the age of black and white. It's a hard-scrabble existence on the back lot of MGM late in 1959. But somehow, just about everybody survives, except the bad guys. Even if the series didn't survive. But in watching those shows, it does make me think about how I'd survive if put to the test. Could I rub two sticks together to make a fire? Would I have the stamina to make it back to civilization? Could I endure a week without a shower or a mocha? And maybe the deeper question that I harbor is, what really is most essential to maintaining life? Jesus was really put to it when the Spirit led him in the wilderness. And that phrase in itself is a little intriguing. Jesus wasn't bound and gagged by Jesse James and dragged into the wilds. We are told that the Spirit led him in the wilderness. Did the Spirit lead him into the wilderness? Or just lead him in the wilderness? We don't really know. But in any case, Jesus is out there. But he isn't alone. He's not alone, and he's not comfortable either. And it's only after 40 days of fasting that the devil shows up. Isn't that the way of it? The fiercest temptations don't happen when we're strong and rested and well-fed and flushed. The toughest trials seem to come when we're lonely, irritable, tired, hungry. And the devil sucker punches the Son of God when he urges Jesus to make a loaf of bread. Just one. After 40 days of fasting. I can't resist a loaf of Irish soda bread if I go to Wegmans right after I had dinner. It simply flies into the shopping cart. But putting faith before food, Jesus resists, insisting that there are things more important than appetites. Of course, the temptations continue in this story, as the devil offers him unlimited power if Jesus will just worship him. And the last temptation is to call upon God to spare him pain and death if he were to fall from the top of the temple. Jesus says no. Now there would come another day when Jesus would be tempted to call upon God to rescue him from death. But in that anguished moment, a few weeks down the line, he'll say, "Not my will, but yours." So if Jesus struggled to give his life for the sake of salvation and for the sake of all of us, he sure wasn't going to take a dive just to amuse Satan. And these temptations, as I've noted in my prayer, are strange, dramatic, pretty rare for many of us, I think. But as we enter this season of Lent, a time when we poke about in the recesses of our lives and ask for help, we might just discover ways that our faith is tested too. Perhaps we're not thrown off a pinnacle, but we can surely be thrown for a loop. We may sometimes wonder where God is, or who God is, or even if God is. Illness, loss of one kind or another, shattered dreams, disappointments, they can all stretch our faith, and sometimes to the snapping point. A theologian by the name of Dorothy Sola penned one of the most concise sentences I've ever read from a theologian. And that in itself is a miracle. You must understand that a theologian is a unique species within the human family that is notorious for knitting together prose that will stretch from here to Cleveland. Her miraculous sentence is this: all true theology begins in pain. And it was actually your own esteemed pastor, the Reverend Glenn Evans, who once remarked to me, probably 30 years ago, that many budding young theologians attending seminary are deep in grief. It really was quite common. I was one of them. Couldn't agree more. Another way to put it, maybe, is that many of us begin to think most deeply about God when we are precisely in the wilderness, often far removed from the comforts of a comfortable life. And such times in the wilderness can carry both gift and curse. The gift is that in our pain we often refuse to accept superficial answers, and so we're inclined to dig. The curse is that wilderness living is hard, and we're tempted to leave it, to pursue something to numb our pain, whether that's food or drink or drugs or sex or shopping or the internet. Anything to deaden the pain. Of course, if the good Dorothy Sola is correct, that can also short-circuit our efforts to reflect upon God. Sometimes it's easier to forget the whole God thing and get busy. Busy with anything. Anything that distracts. Perhaps, maybe not so different from Jesus, we are tempted to start making bread, or spending it, or hoarding it. What Barbara Brown Taylor calls one of the pacifiers that make us think we can get along without God. It's no accident that banks often have plaques on some of their doors with words like trust, securities. And I have nothing against banks. I tend to believe in them. But we are beings who hunger for something we can trust, and certainly for security. And sometimes our hunger sends us toward relatively flimsy substitutes for the real thing. Well, everyone knows that the month of March is 85 days long. And so we enter into this season of Lent with a long stretch ahead of us, a long march, as we journey more deeply into ourselves and into our God. But happily, it's not a journey we take alone. That's the beauty and the blessing of a circle of faith, a church. We don't face the challenges of faith alone. That would be silly. Then we'd never get together on Sunday mornings to worship. We'd never pray together. We'd never pool our resources to reach out to other people. We'd never gather for Lenten suppers. How would we get our recommended daily allowance of soup? We gather in order to gain strength, to fend off the temptations, to fight the temptation of isolation by feasting on community, to fight the temptation of despair by sharing our faith. And in a fairly pointed way this year, we fight the temptation towards cynicism by hearing stories of compassion in action. Souls bringing love into the wilderness of others. Actually, Marianne helped me out, but I was able to find 2 tiny red cedar seedlings poking above the snow just about a week ago. Their tiny roots took hold in amongst the big roots of the maple tree out by my house. It's a place with roots so big that I dare not take my lawnmower because I'll kill my blade. And this gnarled and bumpy patch of ground provided just the protection needed for new life to begin. So the symbolism wasn't lost on me that sometimes it's the roughest patches, the roughest stretches of life when life seems to pop up in a new way, if we have the eyes to see it. And that's not easy. Because places of strife and struggle may be the last places we'd expect to find God. But I did recently, and I don't mean the Cedars. One evening, not too long ago, I was camped out on the end of a couch in the lobby of MM Ewing, reading an old People magazine full of Kardashians. And all at once, the room was abuzz with a couple who just emerged from the sweetheart dinner nearby in an adjoining room. And wasn't this pair just all a twitter with romance, each dressed up as though they were going to a prom, corsage, boutonniere. They sounded like high school sweethearts, speaking with such tenderness about how attractive each one looked, what a delight it was to share the occasion, and even a hint of that adolescent awkwardness, as though they'd never dated before. MM Ewing can be a wilderness. People are passing away all the time there. Routines are dreary. Days are gray. The food, And yet, in that wilderness, life and love were brimming that evening, thanks to the kindness of many and the love of two. I think it's there, if we look for it. A couple of red cedar saplings, barely 2 inches high. Maybe it's in the eyes of two seniors at the prom. But the next time you enter a wilderness, see if you can spot any of those seeds of love, and by the grace of God, maybe even plant one or two. Because you never know, the next thing you know, you might just be in a garden.